Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to another live stream of Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel and video game news. Today is Wednesday, October 25th. Starting maybe a little bit late, but I'm getting generally back into the motions of waking up and trying to be a little bit early when I wake up, particularly after Monday, and just being woken up way too early and then drinking what is pretty much just poison, a 5-hour energy drink. It really wrecks me mentally, if not physically. And it's not something I would recommend to ever drink except for in real emergencies, but even in that, I don't know if it really is that big of an emergency that you should ever drink it. Like, almost certainly, like, I'm drinking 5-hour energy extra strength too, and it's like almost certainly most people don't need that. Let's open some packs. Yep, pretty low response there. This is the only new card, and everything else is something we already own. And if you just look on average here, we're having quite a few cards that already are at 3 copies or more, with all these Master Duel cards not being destroyable, as I understand it, so you can't even turn it into crafting points. Which, that's the real thing that should have probably happened around the 1-year anniversary in particular, is we don't have any of this. Around the 1-year anniversary, they should have said, surprise, all those extra cards that you have can now be dismantled as extra cards if you got them specifically from the Master Duel pack, because that would have given you quite a boost in crafting and would have certainly helped. And you could certainly have a rolling release where cards in certain expansions would eventually end up being crafting points. So theoretically, I should have been playing this Duelist Cup more over the past couple days. I didn't, obviously. But yeah, couple more levels for more gems. If we could get up to this point, that would be nice. If we could get all the way to this point, that'd be great. If we get all the way to that point, that's fine. But that all takes extra time and effort, and yep, past couple weeks, extra time and effort is the one thing I definitely have not had. I barely, as I just get older by every year, I'm losing the amount of energy and time I really have, and I'm sleeping more and just tired more. Probably at an unhealthy, unnatural rate at that point too. So for the accountability section, I'm still working on programming my smart on-air sign. Mostly I spent almost all of yesterday just learning the Wi-Fi manager library and trying to adjust it so it looks slightly different and has the right information in it. Software could certainly use a little bit of an improvement, in my opinion. The header support library, in that it's not 100% easy to get it to look the way you want it to look, and there's a little bit too many steps, like, for how it all goes, and then there's some complicated things that just don't seem to actually work. So while you never really want to do this, I had to actually go into the header file and edit and make a modified version of the default code, which, yeah, you really don't want to do that, particularly in Arduino, because Arduino has the library manager, so at any point you could be working on a completely different project, and in the process of working on that completely different project, you could accidentally update Wi-Fi manager, and in updating it, you would then download the official branch instead of a forked version that you made effectively. That's what they call it, forked versions. Or a modified version, we'll just call it modified version. So, yeah. Whereas, generally, you want the possibility of, at least the possibility, of being able to upgrade a library through the library manager in Arduino, since that's what library managers are supposed to be for. And you want to be able to do that in such a way that your code would still compile and there really wouldn't be a problem there. Particularly if it was just a minor security style update. I really have just like nothing here. Nothing here I can really do. I've had one of those rare occasions where I don't have a very good starting hand. Yeah, so the Wi-Fi setup and the captive portal and all of that, like, now weirdly, on the captive portal, the only time I've ever figured out for it to have the pop-in that says you need to sign in to this thing is if you set your IP address to something like 8.8.8. Now I imagine if you set the IP address to any public range instead of a private range, you would still, on Android phones, get the pop-up. But 8.8.8.8 is Google's DNS lookup site. It's always going to be that, almost certainly, unless Google goes out of business, and then a bunch of things would have changed. So it is a good default one. You could also do like 1.1.1, I imagine. I haven't actually tested that. But yeah, if you set it to a private address like 192.168.0.1, in contrast, that doesn't. I haven't seen someone actually play this style deck in a very long time. It doesn't work. And noticeably, in setting up the Wi-Fi setup, I jumped around quite a bit mentally and really forgot about adding the whole download the text instructions as a text file, which there's quite a trick there, certainly, to have a text file as a link but not actually have it be a file on some kind of file system, instead having it be directly in the RAM of the program as a base 64 encoded string, so you can have just kind of weird generated content. Alright, so can we win this turn? The hope is yes. We can do this. Then do this. And then activate this. Then do this. Go ahead and grab that for next turn if necessary. Activate this. And do this. I'm hoping this is the right move. No, I don't have enough Okay. We'll continue down this path, but I don't think I'm gonna win in one turn here. No, not quite. But close. Go ahead and end the turn here and see what he's going to do next turn before we activate this ability to destroy a card by getting rid of a link summoned card in your graveyard or on your field. The only other thing I kind of started working on and really was falling asleep, so I didn't test it, and is just getting the configuration settings and saving it to an actual file, which there is a weird disconnect there in that the Wi-Fi manager really can't access the file system. It's just not designed to integrate that well. Each one of these libraries are designed to be incredibly small and lightweight, and even at that, my code, which is really not doing that much, is already taking up half of an ESP32's program memory. There's just not really a lot of ways to get around it. That ESP32s are really designed to be the bare minimum, good enough for a very compact Internet of Things thing. And that in part is probably why you also see that there isn't a ton of smart devices, Internet of Things that do 4 or 5 things. They do 1 thing, 2 things, maybe 3 things. You have a thermostat, a smart temperature meter that can also tell you humidity. You have a power monitoring outlet that can also relay it and turn it on and off. And even in that, a lot of those devices are very terrible at differentiating themselves and explaining what they do. I've seen all kinds of smart bulbs, and some smart bulbs are programmed so that they can do some things but not other things, and it's not like there's really a huge hardware reason why it couldn't do the other things. It's just that it hasn't been programmed in there. Like almost every smart light, smart bulb should have a sunrise sunset feature, but a lot of them don't. And if they don't advertise it, don't expect it to be there. But yeah, in the programming, which I'm not going to try and ramble on too much today, there is just a point where I need to get away from the distractions. I need to get the code running again just to make sure everything's working, even if it needs some tweaks and polish, so that I can then get back to working with the OBS WebSocket stuff and just double testing things, double checking things. Like making sure that the passwords always work instead of just having worked once. And inevitably I will miss some things. There's not really a way around that, but I want to severely reduce the amount of things I potentially will miss to the point of it not being a big problem. I also spent a lot of time contemplating how to reset the randomly generated unique to each device password, and I opted, after trying to see if there was a way to read the reset button, which there isn't. In most ESP32s, the reset button is directly connected physically to the enable pin on the chip, which just means it's immediately cutting off the power. It's not giving it any kind of soft safe shutdown type thing, nor is it making any special signal that you could read for. So unplugging it via the USB versus hitting the reset button is exactly the same. Then I thought about doing a specific pin, but that would just require you to then have to wire a special pin to reset things, which is, at that point, you're taking the whole device apart and it's just a hassle anyways. Plus there's a small chance that a actual bug or bit of dust or liquid would get in there and then it would short out the pin and reset things. Unnecessary. Plus, if you reset it with the pin, it still doesn't get you the new password that would be generated when you do a factory reset, effectively. So, the best case I picked, and I hope this is the best case, I think it is to just coincidentally kind of make a landmine in the software, and when it's not connected, when it's having trouble, and only when it's having trouble, have it have the ability to reset everything anytime it receives a signal. So if somebody, say, plugs in their USB while it's not connected to a Wi-Fi or a WebSocket OBS software, which really it would have to be when it's not connected to the Wi-Fi, not when it's not connected to OBS. It's very expectable that OBS would be closed or your computer would be off, so it really shouldn't have trouble there. I need to program it, come to think of it, in a slightly better way so it can identify when it's having actual trouble connecting to OBS versus OBS just not responding. Which you, again, don't get a lot of feedback, probably for security reasons because of that. But yeah, so when it's in that troubleshooting mode, when it's in that configuration mode, if you connect it and try to talk to it via a serial terminal, it will just immediately take any message as meaning it's time to factory reset, aka I've just made a landmine against anybody trying to tamper on it, and that it factory resets and erases everything and gives a new randomly generated SSID password, which I think that balances things out nicely. It protects any data, any small amount of data there that it was originally there, and recovers from the situation of people losing the password originally. I'm not gonna summon this time. So yeah, I think that's a fairly nice idea. I do also wonder if maybe I should put in a mode where the light would just be always on in case there's some emergency, like backup, well, no, some kind of emergency situation where the OBS or WebSocket updates and the software just doesn't work anymore. At a certain level, I don't want people to be able to mess with it through the Wi-Fi manager settings though. And so I'm hesitant to do that. Like, I want it when the light to be on for it to really mean that whatever OBS server it's connected to is actually recording or streaming, or at the very least it's getting a signal through advanced scene switcher. So yeah, I think I'd rather say no there and eliminate the possibility that somebody accidentally turns on test mode and then all of a sudden the thing is just not working the way people expect it to work. I also question if maybe I should try and get it to try and blink an SOS signal, but honestly blinking an SOS signal is probably not appropriate. Like, I don't want it to lose a Wi-Fi connection and then start blinking SOS in the middle of an earthquake or something, some real tragedy, and then people are getting distracted looking at a smart on-air sign instead of looking for a real human who might have been sending an SOS signal. It's probably much better to just have blinking occur. And I guess that probably explains why there really has never been a case where I've seen any device actually blink SOS. It's funny how these dots here, as far as what you're pointing to, effectively are in two categories. Best case scenario, you have something that would point 3 different directions downward if it's in one of the extra spots. Or you have something that points left and right. But if it's pointing left and right, it couldn't ever really be pointing to anything downwards in most scenarios. Maybe there's some very rare scenarios where you could get a monster in the trap zone. We have a person's name, Suhahail is how I think you pronounce it, saying hello brother, which I'll read that certainly as a Macho Man Randy Savage voice in my head. But yeah, and then he says good game. I think he clicked the heart too. The thing about the hearts in particular in the chat is that there's really no counter from what I'm seeing, so I'd have to be looking directly at the chat to see if any of that is happening. It doesn't hurt my chat anyway for people to engage with hearts and things like that, but it certainly is a far cry away from those Asian streaming sites where you have the hearts and chats just filling the screen that the streamer is looking at. Like, I'm just not. I don't have the chat set up in such a way to see it that way. And even if I was looking directly at the page, like YouTube, I don't think it really would work that way. I don't know if there is a large ton of news that's happened between Monday and today, but there certainly was something going on with my macro in that it just wasn't really wanting to open up any of the news. So I had to go manually just open up all the news today, and I disabled that extra plugin, which once again, even after changing the settings, just isn't working as well as I'd like it to be. Part of the problem is I think I'm going to have to just rethink the whole system, because when my macro's running, I obviously want tabs to open up on the right when they're a new tab, which is the default action, probably just because I'm used to that being the default action. It really wouldn't change much if the new tabs opened up on the left, but then once you get, if you got everything backwards, I'm gonna have to redo my programming to move everything around. Like, I'd have to flip everything and invert everything. Suha here says, do you have Blue Eyes White Dragon? Not in this deck, but I have massive amounts of cards, so yeah, I definitely have several different variants of Blue Eyes White Dragon. But most decks that are playable at higher levels are not playing anything that's Blue Eyes White Dragon. They're playing much newer cards like this Striker Dragon, and maybe that leads to possibly having a Blue Eyes White Dragon. Here's an older Red Eyes Black Dragon card. Exodia Obliterate. I have Exodia cards, so I'm not sure if I have a card specifically called Exodia Obliterate. Both of those are very much the first generation of Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards, the first cartoon series, and the first cartoon series has been beaten out by at least 4 other sequel series that have added new things. You have the Link summon cards, you have the XYZ summon cards, you have Pendulum summon cards. The latest Yu-Gi-Oh! Cartoon series is trying to reboot Yu-Gi-Oh! Completely and simplify it greatly, and just take 25 years of content and effectively throw it in the trash in favor of a faster paced, simpler experience for younger kids, which, in all fairness, there is some level of that needs to happen, but I do think the latest Yu-Gi-Oh! Cartoon series goes too far with it. I don't think it totally makes sense to be that extreme. Alright, well, every time I'm doing something, I'm taking 500 damage, so I guess the question really comes down to, do I stupidly just continue to do things, or do we hurry up and win? Now, noticeably, there really isn't the best examples of more interesting cards in the later Yu-Gi-Oh! Series anyways. It is by far the case that Yugi Yamamoto is the... Well, that did nothing. Yugi Yamamoto is the most interesting character in Yami Yugi. And the Egyptian god cards and connection to the narrative is much more interesting in my mind, probably because of, in part, my age too, in which Yu-Gi-Oh! Series I grew up seeing. Although I probably was a little too old for even the original Yu-Gi-Oh! Series. Um, okay. Whoops. I don't want to activate that, but I don't think I have a choice now. That was quite the mess, and I spent a lot of effort there. In the end, only really being able to summon Zeus. Yeah, did a lot of stuff there that was really unnecessary in the long run. He's got one card, he basically can't do anything. Might as well surrender now. You could, unless he can summon one thing. Like with Zeus, I could clear the board. Meanwhile, we'll start going through the news because I really don't have a desire to make this go super long. And frankly, I think today will be fairly long as a stream anyways. Apparently, the Final Fantasy XIV director, that's the online one, I believe, cried on as a series creator, thanks him for making it even better. I never expected that the Sagaguchi-san would be making me cry. There's a quote here. At a certain level, I happen to suspect that people in the video game industry in general, I won't even say this is a Japanese thing where Japanese people overwork themselves too much. I think they all overwork themselves so much that they start to lose emotional stability. Arguably, I think a lot of older people start to lose emotional and mental stability and start crying more than they would actually admit to. And certainly, it's fairly normal and acceptable to cry, even as a man. But yeah, I can certainly say that when I was overworked in a job, I was effectively losing it as far as just emotional stability. Everything would make me exhausted, angry, upset. But then also, that is coldly explaining an emotional response. Oh. But one of the things I would say I personally like about video games, though, is the fact that they don't really matter and that this isn't brain surgery and people aren't dying during the process. I have no idea why why Zeus disappeared there. There's no reason why Zeus should have disappeared. Must have been something he activated. Suha says, have I ever watched the Yu-Gi-Oh! Abridged series? No. Is it one of the funny abridged ones, or is it literally just abridging the series? I assume it's a funny abridged one. In general, I've pretty much seen all of the first Yu-Gi-Oh! Cartoon from the beginning to the end, and even the much more recent movies, they go back into it, or at least one movie that goes back into it. So, kind of when you've seen everything, it becomes a little bit less necessary to watch the abridged version. Plus, compared to an abridged series I have seen, which would be the Sword Art Online Season 1 abridged part, they're still working, I think, to doing any more of the Sword Art Online stuff. Or maybe they gave up on it, I'm not sure. Like, Sword Art Online's first season in particular is just stupid, so making fun of it and being silly in a bridge series becomes this transformative, creative thing that's barely even really touching upon it. The abridged series that I've mostly seen are not really abridging the story appropriately, or respectfully, or accurately. They're throwing in a Mystery Science Theater 3000 style jokes without doing the idea of Mystery Science 3000 where you actually sit through the entirety of the movie. I could certainly see where the Yu-Gi-Oh! Abridged series could be funny. Suha says yes, it's a funny one. Well, there's a lot of seriousness in it. And so breaking out the stupid drama in Yu-Gi-Oh! And making it funnier could work. But you'd really have to think about who are the characters you really want to focus on, and how you're going to make comedic characters off of the, like, one friend in the group of Yu-Gi that doesn't really play Yu-Gi-Oh! Not Joey Wheeler with his Red Eyes Black Dragon, but the other guy friend who barely pays any attention, plays any part. You either cut that character out completely, or you have to make a whole new personality that somewhat fits the narrative. And the same is kind of true for the girlfriend of Yu-Gi-Oh! In that she doesn't play enough of a role. There's actually just too many characters, on top of there being a bad guy of the week, and then you'd have to make personalities with the bad guys of the week, and I don't, you'd have to get much more creative than me to make each of the recurring bad guy characters make some sense. Yeah. And there really inherently is just not that much to actually abridge in Yu-Gi-Oh! Season 1. It's like you have the main plot that starts with Suha says, okay, I'll see you again tomorrow, I've got to go, you rock, keep going, thanks. He also said nice win and GG above that. I skipped those messages. I would have gotten to him eventually. I won't be streaming until Friday though, so not that there isn't pre-recorded in YouTube Shorts coming out on my channel all the time. But yeah, to finish my thought, you have the whole first tournament on the island Pegasus arc that goes too long, in my opinion. And honestly, there's only a couple of fights there that are super great. A lot of the problem with Yu-Gi-Oh compared to like Sword Art Online is Sword Art Online doesn't have this secondary goal of teaching you how Yu-Gi-Oh cards work, even in the case of the Yu-Gi-Oh cartoon where the rules were being made up and they hadn't actually figured out how the card game was going to work yet. But they were still pretending and trying to build interest on the collectible card game aspect. So they were spending a lot of time on that, explaining that. The reoccurring joke there certainly is whenever they played Pot of Greed, they would explain how Pot of Greed played, and they played it almost every single battle, it felt like. So Pot of Greed would be a recurring character in the Bridge series you probably would want to use and make fun of, even though Pot of Greed is a card and not actually a actual person or human. But yeah, so the entire first arc really is heavily focused around just teaching the basics of Yu-Gi-Oh! And the entire series continues down that way. Every single battle shows off at least one new card or one new strategy of multiple cards, even in the late terms, as a way of saying, hey, this is what the show is about. It's about learning about these new cards, which constantly creates a situation where you have a lot of garbage cards that you're selling in the real card game, and only a few like high quality, focused looking good cards. I have 3 plus 1. Probably should activate this. Moving on back to news, which inherently I'm only like 40 minutes into the stream and already, like, because I guess I start too late, I've lost a chatter on the chat that's actually putting a bunch of comments. So in that situation, when I evaluate that interaction, I have to say, well, it's not the fact that I'm talking about news that loses me viewers, it's the fact that even live streams, which inherently were designed to always be super long, 3-4 hours, and when you start talking Twitch links, you definitely are talking closer to 5, 6, 7 hour streams that they're trying to push for. I just don't think it works. I just don't think people have that much time in a lot of these situations. Thinking this might do something, but I don't know what this is potentially going to do, because you've got this card that's stolen my attack. Unless there's some way I can destroy this card and destroy this card. I'm at most just hoping that maybe this guy would special summon enough things that I could activate this. Go ahead and toss that. Go ahead and take that. Special summon 5 or more monsters this turn. If your opponent normal summoned or special summoned 5 monsters. I don't think he's done 5 monsters. And me special summoning things actually doesn't do anything. Oh, when he countered it. Countered it twice. So he's just got a 1-turn kill attempt here, which he may be able to pull off. Not actually trying to do all the math. Yeah, probably. So 28 plus this plus this. And I never stood a chance. He had too many counters for all my counters. Oh well. So Nintendo has a new tournament controller rules that are apparently, quote, a huge step back for accessibility, it's been claimed. The new rule bans any controllers not licensed by Nintendo, which in this picture you are seeing actually controllers that are licensed by Nintendo in the fact that you have 2 Joy-Cons in a special holder that has been, I assume, 3D printed for somebody without the use of their left hand. So they've moved the left Joy-Con directly to the left so that they could reach over and hit this and hit these buttons, and then they've got a extra finger bump here for the left bump. I'm not sure if there's something back here to get to the left triggers. I'm pretty sure there's triggers and bumps on Joy-Cons. I haven't played a Switch in a while. So weirdly, this, by the idea of not licensed by Nintendo, still should be tournament legal. But I could also certainly see people being very unhappy on the fact that you have to either use regular Joy-Con or Pro Controller. Let's see. And see, weirdly, they are saying that 3D printed specialized equipment also is not going to be acceptable. Nintendo, particularly for tournaments, though, doesn't care. Like, this is a great example of Nintendo being a Japanese Japanese company trying to control things that they really shouldn't have that much control on in the first place, because they're not really running these tournaments as much as they're just sponsoring the tournaments. Yeah. And really it should just be up to the tournament organizers whether they want to allow third-party controllers. For the most part, when you start to think about fighting game tournaments and Evo, it's pretty much the case that you're allowed to bring basically any controller you want and use it, and there's not really any limitations there. There is just the case that if you pause the game in the middle of a fight, you're immediately disqualified, and that's it. What else can a controller really do to improve a high-level player's performance? Not much. Like, it is just going to be somebody. I suppose if there was a controller board out there that had macros plugged into it in the program, and somebody was just inherently cheating because of that, there might be something to that. Like, if all of a sudden you had entire actions happening when the player is not actually pushing all the buttons, I suppose that would be called cheating. But weirdly, we've never had anybody caught with doing that or accused of doing that even. So really, these rules are just Nintendo saying, we want you to buy Joy-Cons, which are frankly one of the worst controllers available of the modern controllables. controllers, and they think that their pro controller, which is not that good, is good enough for tournaments. Now inherently there is another point to be made here, in that you really shouldn't be playing Nintendo games in tournaments in the first place, or playing Nintendo games for professional. Anyways, because Nintendo is the exact same kind of controlling jerk in every other case too. If you're a streamer trying to stream Nintendo things, you're going to get DMCA'd or copyright struck, or they're going to claim all the revenue. So that's why there's very, very few Nintendo YouTubers out there, and a lot of them, even if they are talking about Nintendo, don't actually show Nintendo footage. There are also, in that same level, a lot of jerkishness in that Nintendo games are not available on PC, so anybody who would be a streamer, it has to emulate, which Nintendo's against emulation too. If they were going to easily try and capture the footage, it's probably fairly easy to get a capture box, but once again, you're just going to get copyright claimed if you did try to stream Nintendo content. The truth is, Nintendo has always been that way. It has just been the case that young kids, myself included, grew up with Nintendo, playing Nintendo, and we just associate way more positivity to Nintendo as a company than they really deserve, and we overlooked and didn't see all the nonsense and garbage. Like, even in the NES era, like, when an NES was being broken, they were training the repair people to basically blame the kids and say that they were eating candy or they were drinking soda, spilling soda on it, which almost certainly did happen on some levels, but for that to be the default thing that you're suggesting in your training videos to Nintendo repair people, it really just highlights a certain level of disdain and hubris, which Nintendo got away with quite a bit, and video game companies in general got away with quite a bit. I guess I just can't do anything. I've got some cards here: Vampire's Domain and Zombie World. Can't tribute summon anything other than zombie monsters. Pay 500, you can normal summon one vampire monster. Vampires and zombies is a theme. It's an interesting idea. They don't really do too much with it in Yu-Gi-Oh! That I've ever seen. In fact, I don't know if I've ever even seen a vampire card actually played. A RPG developer called Artisan is opening the largest foreign-owned studio in Saudi Arabia. Artisan Studios has entered in an agreement with Saudi Arabian's Ministry of Investment. Yeah, there's definitely some slippery slope arguments that can be made anytime we hear something like this, and that the fear, whether it's going to be proven out or not, we'll have to potentially wait and see. But the fear is that Saudi Arabia's government would influence the development of a game like that, or video games in general in the video game community, and they might do it incredibly slowly. Like, every country effectively has seen the domination through economics strategy that China has developed and perfected over the past couple hundred years or so. In the case of you have what was originally a very poor country, a very disorganized country, just being able to gain soft power by selling everything very cheaply and exploiting the labor of its citizens, which has caused the concept of international economics or global companies to really become a thing, whereas even 100 years ago, like, companies were 100% the company in that country and considered in part to be patriotic citizens of that country. And so you wouldn't have a General Mills, for instance, doing business and changing how it does business just because it was exporting some small amount of cereal outside of the United States. It wasn't even probably exporting any cereal outside of the United States. And in two different ways, this certainly can go. So neither scenario is settling of that fear. Like, if this studio came out with a great game, great AAA game that everybody loved, people would be happy for the short time, but there still would be that fear. All right, so now we've accepted their first game, with there not being anything really controversial or different about that first game, but then once they have a player base, once they have a fandom, they'll come out with the second game, and the second game will be a little bit more pro Islamic or pro Saudi Arabia in its design. Or it's the exact opposite, and they come out with a game that is immediately 100% censored, for lack of a better term, and pro Saudi Arabia, pro Islamic, those are the big concerns, certainly. And then, of course, there's a third argument that should or do gamers want to support financially Saudi Arabia. So I'm sure some will say yes, some will say no. But that is in particular the problem with a Ministry of Investment investing in a company instead of just a more independent company in a country that has a constitution where you can have companies that completely disagree and are not working in lockstep with the government. Of course, that's the exact same argument that gets made almost any time a Middle Eastern country invests in a video game, and they're all doing it. And we potentially could make the exact same argument for other countries decades ago, and for other countries decades in the future. I could easily see at a certain point us making, or me making, the exact same argument around Australia. Australia, much more of a conservative government than you would think. I could see Australia starting to try to invest in video games and then trying to promote their special brand of conservatism instead of just censoring games like they mostly do, or banning games like they mostly do now. Next bit of news. The PlayStation 5's detachable disk drive requires an online connection. apparently it's always online drive. Fair enough. I don't know if that is really any different from what is kind of going on even now with the Xbox and the PlayStation 5. There inherently have always been updates that were being made to specifically the disk drive hardware and firmware as far as the encryption keys for specific games and newer games. And the only way the Nintendo Switch gets around that is that there are often mandatory software updates on the Switch cartridges if necessary when you install a game. And you'll see that when you install a game, it says update available. Sometimes it's looking online for that update. Sometimes that update is just on the cartridge itself. So that seems to me like they're making a bigger deal in this article about it being or requiring an online connection. Always online might be a little extreme. It is also worth noting that Blu-ray drives to play Blu-ray videos always really were wanting an online setup too, because they were updating the encryption keys in that aspect also. So that might be in part why they just said it wouldn't be a big deal. There are still a lot of military people who want an always offline device. They want to take a Xbox or a PlayStation and put it on a submarine that's not going to have internet and be able to play their games. So inherently, if it's a scenario where you've got it all set up, you've played the game, and your Halo, your Madden is set up, and then you take it on the submarine and then it says you can't play because you're not connected, that's unacceptable after that initial install. And that's probably the closest line we're going to run into. We are really at a point though where most people do have some sort of internet connection, and video game consoles are really just getting to the point where it doesn't make any sense to not have a online connection. The same is true for Steam, so if you had a Steam Deck that was offline forever, I imagine you wouldn't be able to play games on that either. So your best bet is almost certainly to play a Switch if you were going to be in the submarine, not connected to the internet for 6 months. And it is worth pointing out that if you mod it, if you're hacking it anyways, if there almost certainly will be a device now that will be a little bit easier to install that would replace the disk drive with just an extra hard drive, and then it would look like you have a bunch of real disks in your drive when really you just have a bunch of ROMs on a hard drive, or you'll just have a modern disk drive that can play burned Blu-ray that's of discs, which we're probably past the point where it makes a lot of sense for that many people to have a Blu-ray burner in a computer to burn copies of PlayStation 5 games and make discs that way. It probably makes a lot more sense to just hand a USB stick to somebody with the ROM of a PlayStation 5 disc anyways. So the always online aspect here really isn't going to stop anybody who's just trying to pirate games. It does smack in the face of PlayStation's success at not having always online connection when the Xbox One was originally going to require an always online connection, but certainly we're talking previous generations of controversy at this point. I'm not sure that an always online requirement in the next generation of consoles, or even current generation of consoles, is going to cause anywhere as much of a controversy in 2024 as it would have in even 2020 or 2015. On one aspect, I would say it is a shame that it isn't a little bit easier to turn on a hotspot or plug in a cell phone into game consoles. You can do it, certainly, but how you turn on a hotspot on a cell phone, whether you are authorized to do that without paying extra, and whether you're going to get a good enough latency, which you almost certainly wouldn't on a cell phone, are all big factors that haven't really been improved upon. I was talking about the creator of the Cat Lady in a previous stream, and I do like to follow him as kind of an interesting, independent, small game content creator. I really like the Cat Lady. Honestly, not super fan even of Downfall of Lorelei, so it's 1 out of 3, but I still like the Cat Lady good enough, and the other 2 games good enough to still want to follow him. Noticeably here, he has like an email to contact him on AOL. Well, he's updated that contact info now that he's made a Discord, which this probably isn't a trend setter as a developer by any means, but it does perhaps hint at what we might start to see more and more of, is that we'll see more and more people try to make Discords and move away from Twitter. Like, if people were going to move away from Twitter, it almost certainly at this point would be a case of moving away specifically because you're seeing a decline in interaction and you're just not willing to stay on the platform and turn a blind eye to all the problems you potentially may have with the platform. But there still really isn't the greatest of replacements of Twitter. The whole Facebook threads could have been a replacement for Twitter, but they really should have kept it secret until they were ready to release it to everybody. And every week there's a new controversy somebody tries to stir up against Twitter. Elon Musk being one of the people who tries to stir up controversy around it. Although in all fairness, his most recent proclamation, which really probably hasn't been thought through or isn't actually going to happen, of having having to spend $1 to make a new account, is, I mean, it really isn't that terrible of an idea. If you do actually yeah, if that did actually reduce the number of spammers, that might actually be a very nice thing to just charge $1. And yes, there are definitely some people who won't and can't afford $1 to make an account on Twitter, but I would assume those people probably already have Twitter accounts or don't care to have them. I could almost see it doing that same idea, but also doing some amnesty around it and saying starting in 2024 it will be $1, and then just having everybody now sign up if they ever want to sign up, and then it really would only affect newly born people or newly turned 13 or 18 people, or people who have to make new accounts for brands or bots. Of course, $1 may not stop a lot of bots if the bot farmers are spending $1 to make a bot account on Twitter and then making even $2 on that account before it gets found out and blocked or banned. I've done basically everything I can do here. And I probably should stop playing at this point. We're making good progress here. I kind of would like to continue playing, but I do also have a lot of news and really no desire to stretch out a stream. I didn't even mention in the accountability section, I'm still just playing on my phone all 4 games. Star Trek Lower Decks, making very average amount of progress for the past 2 or 3 months. It's just like I'm getting just really close to the end, I think, and yeah, I don't think there's anything special happening there. Although weirdly, in one of the special events I did unlock a new kind of resource gatherer, which maybe in the main mode they would unlock a new kind of resource gatherer, and then that would be a way of changing up how the gameplay plays a little bit. Although it really doesn't change how you play much, it's just you're already being encouraged to every 3 or 4 hours go back to Star Trek Lower Decks. You have one more thing that you click on to get more resources in that 3 and 4 hour revisit. Not much has changed there. And they're really... They've kind of finished their Halloween events, so with not that much fanfare on Lower Decks. Tinkafuma, I'm still playing that and making probably a lot of progress there. I'm gonna, I think, cap out at a certain level in the next month or 2 at this rate. And they're doing their Halloween event. And then I actually made a little bit more progress on Immortal, was it the 7 Mortal Sins Ecstasy game? But I still haven't really pushed the story mode for that one's the most exhausting of the games, and it just has way too much to do on a daily basis. And Tinkafuma and 7 Mortal Sins are adult games, whereas Star Trek Lower Deck isn't, just to point that out. And I'm still playing Memento Mori and made enough progress after a couple days of being gated to take the next step to get a little bit further, make a little bit more progress. One of the things on Memento Mori though is I've managed to level up all of my characters to level 140, and I don't have 140 level equipment, although in some scenarios I'm actually collecting level 160 equipment, so I'm better off going back a little bit and getting 140 equipment to equip up and power up my 140 characters, because it's going to be a long while. I would suspect probably a month or more before I get to the point where I can level everything up to 160. The link level system in Memento Mori is weird in that you need 5 characters at level 160, and then it will give everything else level 160 for free. So we're at level 12 here. It'd be nice to make it to level 15. I doubt I'm going to get all the way to level 19. Yeah, 4 more days, so basically just Friday is the day that we would stream, and we've got a decent amount of gems. If there was something we needed to spend gems on, I'm not sure there is. No. Let's see, GameDeveloper.com has this report that says that Unity's runtime fee quietly gave large developers exemptions in its launch rush. Almost certainly that would have been the case, although large developers may very well have their own separate contracts, and that is not uncommon, I would say, for probably even the Unreal Engine, that very large developers like EA probably do have separately negotiated fee things. But it does also kind of point out some weirdness and craziness as far as the idea of the runtime fee concept in general. Is you're not pissing off your biggest customers, you're only pissing off the small customers who you also were exempting from actually having to pay the runtime fee. So you're really losing all your B tier to your C tier customers, all the people in the middle with the runtime fee. They just didn't really think it through. If you were going to do a runtime fee and stick to it, you almost certainly would have wanted it to apply to your biggest customers, the ones who would have installed every single time the games way more often. YouTube advertisers, we follow them, put out an interesting tweet 9 hours ago. Looking for more ways to create? You can now export videos directly from Adobe Premiere Pro to YouTube Shorts. Check it out. So this new beta lets you create, export, and caption your videos to Facebook, TikTok, and YouTube, which, yeah, on a certain level, if you're making a very high quality video, then you probably would be using Adobe Premiere Pro. Although arguably I'm not sure that I would say you should be using Premiere Pro. Now, let's see, can we go back here? The thing that OBS has a problem with, and I run into this, is you don't have different frames effectively for different source outputs. So when I'm streaming the YouTube shorts that are being automatically made to Twitch, I'm having to stretch. You can stretch it, but you can't crop it. You can't frame it in any way. Whereas I'd like to frame it. I'd like it to say, hey, here is a slightly bigger than 1080 by 920 square of video, and I want you to cut just the 920 by 1080 in the middle, and don't try and stretch and skew it. Just crop it so that that part is being streamed to Twitch, where the inside of that slightly bigger than 1080 square, you then would make a different frame for YouTube Shorts that would be actually rotated, so not 920 by 1080 but 1080 by 920, and then you would want a second frame around a different part of the video to say here is the landscape format versus here is the portrait format. Actually vice versa, here's the portrait format instead of the landscape format, because inherently Twitch is landscape, shorts are portrait, and there's just nothing that really works well with that at the moment, particularly in OBS or anything else. I've had to do a whole bunch of custom things. Now it looks to me like there might be some presets, although I don't know what Premiere Pro means when they say preset, and there are formats. So one would hope that you could make a video and there would be a version of that video that has more information on the sides more visual information, more pictures on the sides in one exported format versus the other. Noticeably though, while it says you can build templates, which is kind of what I'm talking about, it doesn't seem to me like there's a lot of things to add here. There's no tags, there's no categories, there's just a text thing. This is effectively what my macro that I programmed does when I put out videos on Patreon and Facebook and like Tumblr and Twitch, which noticeably they are only focusing here on Facebook, TikTok, and YouTube. They're not trying to integrate Twitch clips, which are a mess and just don't have support, really. So, yeah. This really isn't enough of a feature at the moment to be anything other. Here's a little value add because you're overpaying to play Premiere Pro. But it does highlight where people are focusing too, as far as the video editing software, which probably indicates where video content creators are being pushed or focusing to, is that to make more shorts and things. Although the visual quality in a short probably has a lot less to do with its success more than the content quality. Although for the most part, most shorts I've seen are pretty garbage, and they are just these short, quippy, looped features where they're all designed so that you can get confused and just watch it 4 or 5 times, and they restart intentionally way too fast so that it feels like you're watching something that's a lot longer than it actually is. Moving on with the news, Valve wants Steam developers to submit new pricing for Argentina and Turkey. Valve is changing the currency for Steam sales in those regions to US dollars due to exchange rate volatility. Interesting. I wonder what Valve will do if people don't change it. Yeah. Steam is uniquely one of the few global storefronts you really get to see some of the exchange rate volatility, which there's always going to be some country out there whose exchange rate just goes up and down way too much for what any company wants. So yeah, this is probably the second or third time I've heard Steam try to address exchange rate issues. Speaking of marketplaces, I saw slick deals for a white Xbox controller, white Xbox 360, no, not an Xbox 360, it'd be an Xbox Core controller, for like $35 at Walmart.com. So if that sale is still going on, that's a pretty good deal. I'm not a super fan on having a white controller. It's just going to get dirty, certainly, but for $15 off of a product where it's still being made by Microsoft and has that level of quality, whether that is good or bad, that's a pretty good deal compared to paying $55 for a controller, which is way too much. Moving on, Video Games Chronicle says Metal Gear Solid's Master Collection PC has already been modded for 1080p and 4K support. The new mod let players enable 2160p for Metal Gear Solid 3 in particular, which this is almost certainly another great example of how Konami is disappointing. Even when selling old games that people really do love, they've had a rough launch in that they really didn't put that much effort into it, obviously. Otherwise it would have been 1080p and 4K support to begin with, since you are just emulating old games and upscaling old games anyways. and people are on eggshells or on pins and needles as far as dealing with Konami, and they're upset that the new credits don't individually thank Kojima, even though Kojima is mentioned in the old credits. Still, Mario Party 3 is the next Nintendo 64 game to come to Switch Online, which, yeah, they have to kind of space out releasing the Mario Party games, otherwise they would have ended up releasing 10 or 20 of them in a row. I imagine the emulation that Nintendo is doing for Mario Party 1 is exactly the same as it does for Mario Party 2 and 3. That I imagine all those games are programmed almost exactly the same. Let's see, Xbox leadership has addressed Blizzard during its post-deal visit. Now, let's see. The point probably to most make here is, should somebody be sticking out their tongue when you take a picture? This is why it's probably not professional to do that. Inherently, also, maybe you don't have mirrored glasses where you can just enhance, as it were, on the mirrored glasses and look at the reflection of whatever is behind him. Seems to me like everybody is actually looking that direction or that direction. But yeah, as a professional person. On the other point here, you have two people that I'm not sure who these really even are. Spencer and other execs reportedly told crowds they see Blizzard as the Pixar of games. Yep. So they all went to Blizzard and had a nice time, I guess. Yeah. Yeah. And I think there's probably nothing really to take from this article, since if there was anything important being said, it would almost certainly be in the headline. Now, when you use the phrase Pixar of games, there is a question certainly to be made as far as what Pixar are you really thinking of there? Are you thinking of that brief time in which Pixar was really successful before it became acquired by Disney and ruined? Because that's kind of it. Like, Disney's Pixar most recently doesn't have a lot of support from Disney, in my opinion, because Disney itself doesn't really want to make animated movies, and if they were going to make animated movies, they would rather it certainly be under the Disney branding, not the Pixar branding, unless they're trying to make something that's more of a realistic slice of life movie and they're trying to make only Disney movies fantasy movies, which, okay, maybe that there's a mental split there where something like Up doesn't make sense quite as a Disney movie. At a certain level, though, they would have had that under the Buena Vista publishing branding then before, instead of using Pixar as a branding label. And I'd have to look it up, but I'm fairly certain that there was a point there where Pixar in its early times struggled, and then I think maybe Steve Jobs got involved and it became a little bit better, or Steve Jobs left and it became a little bit better. One of those two things happened. But inherently, the end of the story, undeniably, is that Pixar was acquired by Disney. Blizzard is being acquired by Microsoft. I don't feel like Blizzard is being told that they're going to be a better company under Microsoft by using that comparison, because I don't consider Pixar a better company under Disney. But what really happens, we'll have to wait and see. I kind of do suspect that maybe Blizzard, under different leadership or ownership, may be given a chance to thrive. But it is also worth pointing out that I suspect almost all the talent of old Blizzard is gone now, and so we really just have a very, very different Blizzard with very, very different employees. And I'm not sure that Microsoft really cares about these new employees, these, I assume, fairly younger employees, or the games that they're making. The most recent game, Overwatch 2, is what we have to attribute to the younger employees that are still around at Blizzard. We can't attribute things like the heyday of World of Warcraft or StarCraft or Diablo 1, Diablo 2 to these people. Which, yeah, that makes it a very different situation. And I still very much question whether there just is any talent at Microsoft that can handle remastering a Diablo 1, a Diablo 2, a StarCraft series, bringing those old games back and making them feel good, remastering them or full on remaking them. Now the good news is, it does seem to me, and we have another story about this, that there was something about Larry Herb that was acting as a blocker as far as getting support from Satya Nadella, which Larry Herb was the CEO of Microsoft Gaming, several tiers down the ladder from Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft in general. I'm not sure if Microsoft Gaming is actually a legal separate entity or not. In a lot of these big companies, you may be technically a legal separate entity, but you're all in the same office and you're all treated like you're one big entity. But one of the stories we have later today is that Satya Nadella has said that they're doubling down on gaming, which, yeah, that is a commitment to investing and growing on Microsoft's part that just doesn't seem like was happening with Larry Herb in charge. That being said, maybe what they mean by doubling down on gaming is to just try and acquire yet another company instead of actually making games. Which, yeah, it's not like Microsoft is doing a great job making a ton of games. Starfield is kind of a great example of that, where it's alright, but most people were not super thrilled by it, and it has pretty much been abandoned by a lot of people. People aren't talking about Starfield anymore. It is hardly a Skyrim equivalent. It's hardly a game where people are just going to go back to over and over again. Moving on, GameDeveloper.com says Roblox Corp is cutting jobs in China, but says it has a long-term vision for the market. I guess check out that article if you're interested. And the Dreams and Little Big Planet studio Media Molecule is reportedly laying off 15 to 20% of its staff. The studio ended support for Dreams in September. If anything, I'd say Media Molecule as a company probably should be laying off 15 to 20% of its staff, if not more, because their gimmick of Little Big Planet and Dreams really couldn't sustain a company. It just couldn't. And I wonder if this isn't a case where maybe Jim Ryan or PlayStation in general, since Media Molecule is basically a second-party developer for PlayStation, maybe they were pushing the idea of making games like Little Big Planet and Dreams, when Media Molecule would have done a lot better making more traditional games. In particular, PlayStation needed a developer that would make kid-friendly games, and Little Big Planet and Dreams are kind of kid-friendly, but not really your traditional kid-friendly style game. And there wasn't anyone else really stepping up making something that was kind of kid-friendly. You would think that Sackboy from Little Big Planet would have gotten something closer to a Mario 64 spin-off game at the very least, and it just kind of never happened. Let's see. There's this review from Nintendo Life, and I don't usually follow Nintendo Life, but the quote here that they used, it's not in the headline though, was that this Borderlands 3 Ultimate Edition came to the Switch with nearly completely intact, was the quote. Or something along that line. I'm probably butchering it. But what I found funny about that idea is the idea of just how lowered expectations are on the Switch, that you can be quoted as saying this game has been ported, the Borderlands 3 Ultimate Edition has been ported nearly completely intact, and that's considered a good thing. I also wanted to mention, here's a great example of, if you have ADHD, uBlock Origin really can just do you a great bit of favors. There's obviously a lot of content here that would visually get in the way and make it difficult if you are easily distracted. So you can just use the element zapper or the element picker to permanently block things and just make it much more readable. And eventually really can get down to the point where you are, say, blocking everything on a page permanently to make it just closer to reading the article. And that's what I do with a lot of the other web pages that I get news from, as a way of just not directly copying everything that people are saying, including their advertisements and distracting parts. But yeah, for just people with that mental deficiency, it's not 100% perfect, certainly, but you can slowly improve it. Like all these comments at the bottom, I can see them being a bit of a distraction, but just with a few minutes there, and had I used element picker instead of element blocker there, then you wouldn't have this permanent thing. And then it's a matter of just using different plugins if you want to zoom in or center or justify the text, or just zooming in general, which can drastically change the appearance. Which, at a certain level, this probably, for disability sake and accessibility sake, needs to be addressed. It's always been the case people that are blind would have hard times reading a lot of web pages. They were just not formatted well, and they were just not easy to read. And a lot of web pages do have like accessibility modes. Now, noticeably, Firefox has their own reader mode anyways, where you can just straight up read things. And so you probably are better off using the reader mode than even uBlock Origin. The difference there, though, is the reader mode may not be on perfectly or permanently. Like if I reload the page here, clicking on a link takes you back to the visual mess. Man, what is going on here? I keep blurring things off. So yeah, clicking on the link brought me back to the visual mess, where reader mode shows that. So you can see how there's a very big difference there. I'd still say have U-Block Origin and play with that if you're having trouble viewing things because of all the visual distractions for one reason or another. Here's Meteor Molecules wall of text. It's not even that long. Pause now, I guess, if you want to read it. Then Platinum Games is promoting 9 years ago today, Bayonetta 2 celebrated its release in America, Europe, and Australia. Bayonetta 2 in particular, a Wii U exclusive, and is still a point where you can really only play Bayonetta 2 on the Wii U or the Switch. And we really would like to see it come to Steam. Otherwise, there's not going to be much hope that a Bayonetta 3 would ever come to Steam or PC. Xreal's Air 2 augmented reality glasses apparently simulate up to a 330-inch screen. Pre-orders are available now for the glasses. I believe the Xreal first generation of glasses were pretty good, but not great, and they only came out maybe a year ago. But they were also fairly expensive too, like $250 at least to own them. Whereas I do think this is probably the future, is that we're going to start to see, instead of TV manufacturers making money or barely making money selling cheap giant TVs, as group experiences, we'll start seeing game consoles in particular sell or at least work with very popular individual glasses accessories. They are expensive. Glasses are easy to be broken. It doesn't probably address people with astigmatism or with needs to wear like glasses, bifocals, things like that. Probably not really addressed very well yet. And it certainly would add way too much money if you had to have the glasses to play something like a Steam Deck or Switch. But certainly it benefits something like the Steam Deck. It probably takes less power too. If you have high resolution screens right up to your face, you're probably not having to use as much backlight as having even a 7-inch screen on a Steam Deck. So it might be more power efficient on that aspect. But yeah, I'll probably hear a lot of people reviewing these. The problem with this too is that the gadget reviewers on YouTube that I watch tend to not stick around to any one gadget and come back a year later and say, hey, am I really using this? Was this really worth it? 330 inches is actually way too big. You would have to be at such a far distance for that to make sense. Anyways, like it is going to attempt to cover your full field of view in degrees and angles regardless of the size of the screen. But yeah, 330 inches is probably a bit of an exaggeration because of that. Here's that story I was talking about earlier. Microsoft CEO says it's doubling down on being a game producer and publisher. Using the phrase game producer is confidence building. Xbox company is all in on games following the Activision Blizzard acquisition. One would hope that means they're all in on making games with what they've got and they're not just once again going to try to acquire anything bigger. I imagine they are going to actually constantly negotiate for acquisitions, but not really accomplish any in the next 6 months to a year. Apparently, the ransom group that hacked Capcom has been taken down by international police. Capcom previously said that Ragnar's Locker attack affected up to 390,000 people. This happened in 2020. Now, inherently, there are some stories here where law enforcement have said they've taken down a hacker group, and in reality they've found one person who was barely affiliated with the hacker group and thrown the book at that one person, more than they caught everybody, or they took down the masterminds or the financiers. I wouldn't be surprised if there are actually some big time financiers of hacker groups out there also, on top of just like North Korea funding hacking on a political scale, or Russia funding hacking on a political scale. And then the PlayStation Partner Awards for 2023 Japan Asia has been set for December 1st. User Choice Award voting is open now. I assume that's Japanese people only are welcome, or Asian people only. Yeah, if you're in Hong Kong, Indonesia, Japan, Malaysia, Thailand, or Singapore, you can vote. Noticeably here, no China, no Philippines, no Korea, no Vietnam. Actually, quite a few people not being allowed to vote here. No Taiwan. Interesting. Yep, and then Borderlands has some more codes I'm gonna grab. That they're getting back into the idea of shift codes. Right. So let's start going through the video game news in general. And again, I manually had to open all these articles, so we're probably going to burn through some of them fairly quickly. Let's see. Final Fantasy XIV's Xbox Open Beta release window has been announced. So, release window, spring of 2024. Season 2 item trading in Diablo 4 has been suspended due to a duplication trick. We already talked about that. Insomniac fixing the wrong flag in Miles Morales' house. The Connie Booth reportedly left Sony. We didn't get any follow-up on that. We assume that's true. Spider-Man 2 beat Super Mario Bros. Wonder in UK physical charts. I did hear some people talking more about Super Mario Bros. Wonder, about how there are some fairly difficult levels later on to keep the challenge up. We talked about Kojima not being mentioned in the new credits individually. We talked about the Final Fantasy creator revealing his custom Xbox controller. This is all old. Potential Assassin's Creed Red character art appearing online. Let's see. PlayStation visual arts appears to have suffered layoffs. Pokemon recreating the American Psycho with Craigsire for a new ad. Which, that's a weird move. One day after Xbox, PlayStation took over the Vegas Sphere. EA fixes its EA issue where characters can carry the ball with their hands. These are old articles. Apparently some Spider-Man 2 physical copies are failing to install. It definitely feels like they rushed to launch on that case. War Gaming launched a charity initiative to support Ukraine. So this is probably the new news, so not even really that much new news after I get past all the stuff that I opened as old news. Konami has debuted its first in-engine look at Metal Gear Solid 3's remake. Noticeably, this is a remake, not the remaster which they just sold. This game being made in the Unreal Engine 5. Let's look at that, since that's actually worth looking at, although my blur is enabled, so it's not going to look anywhere as good as it should look. In general, like in any other Unreal Engine game, there's a lot of trees and foliage and water physics. And then the only thing here that has actually been animated bespokely for Metal Gear Solid would be the characters. Being able to pull out a gun and target a gun is not anything really special in Unreal Engine. Being able to climb on ledges is not particularly anything special, although maybe you don't climb on ledges in Metal Gear Solid 3 originally, so there might be new gameplay mechanics being added for what is effectively a stealth game. At the core of it, this may be the problem with Metal Gear Solid 3, is that it is just a stealth game, and it's going to have to be a really, really good stealth game. Otherwise, it's going to have to expand itself into a more modern game that has more movement and gameplay mechanics. Overall, that didn't look terrible. Metal Gear Solid Delta Snake Eater being the name of the remake. Paper Mario's remake has been rated, suggesting that a release may not be far off. Which, yeah, it definitely feels like Nintendo is rushing to get the last bits of Nintendo Switch games out there. I wouldn't be surprised even if the next Nintendo console looks very much like a Switch. It has a very different CPU GPU setup, and it possibly doesn't have the same cartridges. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's just a different size cartridge and they try to sell everything again because of the different size cartridges. We already talked about the director crying for being thanked, which I imagine Japanese people probably don't get thanked very often either. There's just a lot of pressure and expectations on them, but there's usually not very much gratitude that happens in the adult world anywhere, but particularly in Japan, I suspect that's the case. We talked about the Nintendo tournament controller rules nonsense. We talked about Artisan opening the largest foreign-owned studio in Saudi Arabia, although this is, I guess, a weird thing in that it is only being invested in by the Ministry of Investment of Saudi Arabia. It's still considered a foreign-owned studio that's being opened in Saudi Arabia. Which that implies you're either going to import a lot of programmers and game developers into Saudi Arabia, or you think there's enough Saudi Arabians out there who can program and make video games. And maybe there is, and maybe there isn't, I'm not sure. But yeah, I would suspect there probably aren't that many programmers who, since there really isn't a demand for programmers in Saudi Arabia, would be my guess as far as video game programmers. It's going to be the chicken or the egg problem, where there aren't enough staff to hire up and build a company in Saudi Arabia, and because there isn't a company in Saudi Arabia, there won't ever be enough staff. The PS5 user interface has started showing which PS5 games can be streamed with PlayStation Plus Premium, which I guess is probably this symbol here. Let's see. Video Games Chronicle also says the name of Diablo 4's first expansion may have been discovered by data miners. The name Lord of Hatred has been found in the new test build. Okay, whatever. Who cares what the name is, really? New PS5's optical disc drive requires an internet connection to connect. The online requirement has raised preservation concerns. Not sure if there's anything here though in details. It says internet connection required to pair disk drive and PS5, I imagine. Account for PlayStation Network and internet connection needed for streaming. So yeah, it definitely feels like Really, they're just saying when you first install it, you have to connect it to an internet. So you can't have a PlayStation 5 that has never been connected to the internet when you install the disk drive. Meanwhile, the preservation concerns aren't really even that big because you still have the original PlayStation 5s that don't have that issue. Almost certainly what there is that there are security E-fuses, is what they're called, built into this, and when you plug this into this, it blows one of those security E-fuses. That doesn't inherently mean that you can't pull one of these out and then put it into a different hardware, but it probably means that you can't do it very often, like maybe 2 or 3 times. So one broken new PlayStation 5 may let you take the disk drive and put it on it, but it probably won't let you swap it between 2 back and forth. And you probably wouldn't want to do that anyways. But yeah, it probably puts in an encryption key or a serial number in an E-fuse and blows an E-fuse. Something that's irreversible in it to pair it with it. The talk of E-fuses is, I think, probably more propaganda than usefulness as far as actual security goes. Microsoft says Starfield's release was Game Pass's biggest ever new subs day. The Bethesda RPG powered a record Q1 for Microsoft's gaming business. Which, okay, I guess that's one way of Microsoft putting out good news, even if people seem to not be that interested in Starfield. And even in this case of Video Games Chronicle, seems like they kind of picked a screenshot where the eyes were wonky just to highlight that Starfield has some problems. Unless there's some kind of storyline reason, like this character is blind or something, that the eyes would be wonky. Even in that case, it's still, without explanation, looks weird. Let's see, we already talked about Metal Gear Solid Master Collection, not the remake, already being modded. Already talked about Mario Party. And then Microsoft reported a record Q1 for gaming revenue, partially driven by Starfield. In all fairness, Starfield did sell a lot in that first quarter. I just don't think it's going to sell a lot in the long term. But maybe they don't care that much about that. Particularly in the case of Microsoft, they really don't need Starfield to be like Skyrim. They don't need it to be their one money-making cash cow that they can just milk forever. They can instead focus on putting out other games and continuing to get more hardware sales and more Game Pass subscription sales. We already talked about them visiting Blizzard, although there really didn't seem like there was much being said there. Although if maybe I read the article, it might have some more interesting details in it. Modern Warfare 3 PS5 Slim Bundle has been spotted in the wild. Okay. And then Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth has an Animal Crossing style island sub-game. Which, okay. It's an interesting sub-game. Trying to move through the news fairly quickly today, so this will be now the Gamatsu news. Let's see. We already talked about Mario Party 3. Annapurna Interactive Deluxe Limited Edition Collection announced for Switch, 12 games on one cartridge, which, if anything, highlights how 12 games on one cartridge can happen because you can make fairly small size games. It's a eclectic Annapurna Interactive collection here. Donut Country and What Remains of Edith Finch, fairly different. Yeah, I'd say almost all of these are fairly different. Several of these games have not been physically released before. It does create for a weird cover art. They didn't really put a lot of thought into the cover art. Nobody's going to grab this on the shelf and say, what is this? If anything, looking at this on the shelf, I would have thought this would have been the Aliens movie box set with an A on it. Star Wars Dark Forces Remastered launches February 28th, 2024. This is a remastered first-person shooter. Which, yeah. Really, I think Dark Forces probably needs a remake, not a remaster. And people who know what Dark Forces are will be interested in the remaster, but anybody who doesn't know what it is will be, I think, fairly disappointed in what feels like a Quake/Doom style shooter game. I covered it relatively recently ago. I think I covered it at least, if it's the game I'm thinking about. And it really was just a lot of wandering around shooting. Let's see, this game is coming out on Steam. These screenshots that are 2D animated are not the game's main gameplay art, I don't think. So they're being fairly deceptive here. It is Star Wars related though, so it does deserve a YouTube short. A game called Gory Cuddly Carnage origin story trailer is available if you want to check that out on Gamatsu. This might be an interesting skating / parkour / fighting game. So it's basically now that I want to enable that other plugin so that the things would open on the left side. We already talked about the partner rewards. Dynasty Warriors M has been announced for iOS and Android. Euphoria The Saga 2 launches in early 2024. What's it being launched on the Switch? Persona 3 Reload has this trailer for this character. Hotline Miami Collection is now available for the PS5 and Xbox Series. Acquire announced a roguelike deck builder cards RPG, The Misty Battlefield, which I think we had already talked about that one, which means possibly the rest of these Gamatsu articles are old. Which would really mean that very little news happened on Gamatsu between Monday and Wednesday. Xbox partner preview livestream set for, I guess, today. 20 minutes of updates from third-party partners and indie studios. I guess that already happened, but didn't really see any news from it. The finals cross-open beta test set for October 26th. To November 5th for the PS5, Xbox Series, and PC. What is the finals, though? Do they have a link to Steam? No, they don't. It's a free-to-play first-person shooter, which this definitely doesn't feel like a free-to-play first-person shooter. And looking at this trailer, it looks very different from the artwork I was seeing before. Yep. There is something interesting about the idea of running around a building and having more destructible environment and multiple floors and levels. That's not something that we've fully seen implemented in games, and it definitely would start to change the way these kind of games work. It definitely has been a case where whether you were standing on dirt or sand, or even if you are on a floor of a building, verticality was never really a consideration. And you could certainly evolve these games to have more verticality. Although 3 or 4 levels with destructible environments so you can get from up and down one floor easily changes it, even compared to something like Quake, where you might be at an upper level or lower level, but it would be still a big arena, open area where you could shoot down from one level to the other. A game called Manor Lords Early Access launches on April 26th for PC and later for consoles. I imagine this isn't really anything that would interest me, but I'll make a short around it anyways. My effort to make YouTube shorts didn't go through perfectly, I don't think. I think I may have lost some shorts. But whatever. I have so many. If I lost 50, I'd still be fine. But it's once again an example of my macro all of a sudden not wanting to work as well as it once was, or should have been from the beginning. So I've got other programming on top of programming to do. Metal Gear Solid Delta Snake Eater's first in-engine look. We looked at that already. There's a 4K Japanese version that Gematsu has on top of the English version, which maybe visually would be more interesting to look at. Spirit of the North 2 has been announced for the PS5, Xbox Series, and PC, which I'd have to remind myself if Spirit of the North 1 is a unique exception to the games where you play as an animal, because there are so many games on Steam where you play as an animal that it's just like you're a bird and you fly around a empty environment. I don't believe that's the case with Spirit of the North. I think Spirit of the North is actually a game with puzzles and platforming and challenges and things like that. Let's see, a Dungeons of Hinterberg social side trailer is available, which is coming out for the PC and the Xbox Series. Do they even have a Steam link? Yes, they do. It's an interesting art style that mostly seems like it's trying to take what would be a normal JRPG and take the J out of it and make it more of a westernization of that. And looking at the languages, being English, French, German, and Spanish, and Japanese, I suspect this is a team of people here from possibly Germany or France. I would guess, looking at the big horn, that this is probably Germany. But we've already made a YouTube short on it, so I'm not going to make another one. Nor am I going to spend the time to watch the trailer, even though it does look intriguing. Still Wakes the Deep has its first look at gameplay trailer. I don't know if I've heard of this one before. It's an interesting name, Still Wakes the Deep. You can see the screenshots here are different from the trailer screenshot, and yes, I've already made a short, that's why it's on the follow list. Velocity series spiritual successor Ikaro Will Not Die, the whole name is Ikaro Will Not Die, has been announced for the Xbox Series and PC. First things first, I'd have to know what the Velocity series is. Looks like it's probably a running parkouring game. That being said, there is a level of character design polish you generally don't tend to see in running and parkouring game. So I suspect this might be slightly higher quality than your typical running parkouring game. Which even in that, it's not particularly easy to asset flip a game and make a running parkour game. You see some people do it, but there are easier ways to make lower quality games if that's what you're trying to do, and if you're just trying to asset flip. So we don't see a lot of parkouring games, although we occasionally do get bursts of 3 or 4. We already talked about Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth having the Happy Resort Dondoko Island trailer, if you want to check that out. It doesn't seem like it's going to change the visual style in any way, though. We already made a trailer for Like a Dragon Infinite. Well, apparently not, because if I had, it would be on the fall list. Let's see, Spirit Tea launches November 13th for the PC, Switch, Xbox One, and Series. It's a life simulation management and detective game, which I wouldn't be surprised if I did see this on Steam and just ignored it. But since it has a press release that it released in Gamatsu, I'll make a short on it. Scarlet Grace, or Saga Frontier character designer, mentions that a Saga Frontier 2 re-release may be coming in 2024. So, put that under the category of rumor, I guess. Ninja Dai Shadow of the Sun for Switch launches November 1st. Amnesia the Bunker Halloween update is now available. This is a great example of where my YouTube shorts are never going to come out fast enough to justify making a YouTube short around a Halloween update. That being said, this is on my fall list and it does meet the requirements. It's rated very positively. It has way over 30 reviews. It's not early access. It's not a player versus player online focused game. There's no reason not to put this on the wish list as it is. Although, in all fairness, I don't know if I'm buying any games for the rest of this year or not. I may give up on the idea of getting a Steam Deck in favor of just buying more games this year. The fantasy visual novel Hatsumira from the Future Undying is coming to Switch in 2024. Don't recognize this one, but apparently it is on Steam. Weirdly, it is marked adult only though. See, you've got mermaids, you've got undead and dwarves, you've got several different characters here. Let's see, use of alcohol and tobacco, strong language, mature themes, crude and mature humor, bathroom humor, rare partial nudity. Rare partial nudity probably does not justify this game being in the adult section, considering how many other games probably should, AAA games probably should have rare partial nudity in them, or do have rare partial nudity in them, and yet they wouldn't be held to the higher standard because they wouldn't have 2D anime style visuals. And partial nudity may mean different things to different people. Some people being in a bikini is partial nudity, where in general toplessness would be considered partial nudity, and only really toplessness of women. I'm going to put this on the fall list, but because it's in the adult section I couldn't make a YouTube short on it even if I wanted to. It does certainly highlight something weird though, that a game that Valve and Steam are saying should be adults only is coming to the Switch, which means it will have an ESRB rating, and yet most people would consider the Switch to be the more censorious, kid-friendly game console, when really it hasn't been that way for Nintendo for at least this generation, if not the previous generation of Wii games too. See, the Switch version will feature event CG from the PS Vita version, as well as some scenes that were only available in the 18 and older X-rated version. Some scenes, but not all, apparently. So you still probably are getting a censored version. And I wouldn't be surprised if the only uncensored version is on Steam in the adult section, or if that is also censored and there is no official way to get the uncensored content, This originally came out in 2016, so it really can't be that bad for the PS Vita. It usually is just bathing scenes, poop bathing scenes, which nothing really inherently sexual in bathing. Famitsu review scores for issue 1821 are available, giving Assassin's Creed Mirage a 33 out of 40, Detective Pikachu Returns a 31 out of 40, not particularly high there, and Lords of the Fallen a 32 out of 40. Haven't really heard anybody say anything about Detective Pikachu Returns, other than seems like it's to be expected, average. And then Alan Wake 2's launch trailer is available on Gamatsu if you want to check that out. It's an Epic Game Store exclusive, at least at launch. Then that is going to bring us to the GameDeveloper.com articles, which we probably have gone through most of these things, most of these stories. City Skylines 2 avoided delay to prioritize. Let's see. Player enjoyment. That's a weird way to phrase that. They're saying they did delay the game to prioritize player enjoyment, or they didn't delay the game to prioritize. Yeah. Honestly, I imagine City Skylines 2 is going to launch a little bit buggy. I think Cities 1 was also fairly buggy in early access for a long time. But that's pretty much as I care to even go into it, so I'm just going to move on. The French developer study shows optimism amid industry shifts, which, okay, good to see optimism. The animation studio Digic Pictures has laid off 35 staff this past summer. They were best known as the animation studio behind the cinematics and marketing for popular games such as Rainbow Six Siege, Elden Ring, and Marvel Midnight Suns. Inherently, I don't know if it is particularly beneficial, though, to have animation studios making cutscenes for video games when those cutscenes then tend to just look disconnected from the rest of the video game. We're probably still very much in a point where it makes sense to do that, though. It's better to have nice cutscenes and then better gameplay with less graphics than to have like decent gameplay with bad graphics and then no pretty cutscenes. A lot of these I'm not sure I can particularly recognize as far as all the characters' faces that they're zooming in on and focusing. For me, I would say also a lot of cutscenes in video games are not that memorable. The high action ones where you're either doing quick time events or not doing anything and just seeing the character do something that you couldn't possibly pull off as the player are the ones that I really appreciate. Whereas most other cutscenes are fairly forgettable. Which, on second thought, maybe that makes a great argument to have less cutscenes in games. Cutscenes are often cynically used as a way of advertising a game as something it isn't. Maybe we should just have video games be a case where you're always in control of the character and you never see a cutscene at all, particularly non-interactive cutscenes. If I want to watch a movie, I should just watch a movie. If I want to play a game, I want to be in control and interact. Yeah. This is... It does bring up an interesting thought. I'll have to think it over for the future to see if I have a more solidified opinion as far as cutscenes in games, but I really am leaning to thinking they're kind of useless in most cases, and yes, you need them to tell some stories, but you probably shouldn't be spending as much time on them as a lot of games do. And a lot of games, in all fairness, don't have very few cutscenes. One cutscene maybe at the beginning and the end, and that's it. Like some of the best scenes in a game like Bioshock, the original Bioshock, those aren't cutscenes. Those are scripted in-engine scenes that you don't literally cut away from. You walk down the hall, and then maybe the camera turns your head so you look in the right direction and takes control away as far as what you're looking at, but you're not cutting away from what's happening. You're seeing what's happening right after you entered an area, and then that section happens, and then you continue playing. Moving on, Neon Machine, that's $20 million to create a moddable blockchain-powered shooter, which almost certainly will not lead to anything good, if it leads to anything at all. Man, I could certainly see, though, a Counter-Strike Go type game where everybody has their own blockchain-enabled guns, and they're trading guns on the blockchain, thinking that adds value to them in some way. Yeah, but I definitely don't see that adding anything positive to the game experience. It would just be potentially, if done perfectly right, it would mean that people couldn't steal as easily or duplicate weapons or steal them from other players as easily. But probably it would still happen quite a bit. We already talked about Valve wanting Steam developers to submit new pricing for Argentina and Turkey. And then Starfield driving Xbox Game Pass subscriptions. Digital Extremes founder James Skamals is stepping down as CEO. Ahead of the studio's 30th anniversary, CEO and founder is moving on from Digital Extremes. Digital Extremes, I think, is a game development company. I kind of think it might be a magazine company, though. Smalls created Epic Pinball and founded Warframe developer in 1993. Will continue to serve on the board of directors, so he's probably just getting old and wants to test out a replacement successor. Yeah, I guess they made Warframe. Let's see, and then we already talked about the rumor, basically. They say report, but they really should say rumor, that Unity waived its fees for some of the larger divs. Let's see. Apparently Microsoft's CEO's compensation is no longer tied to Game Pass growth. Xbox Game Pass has missed its projected growth target for the third year in a row, and Satya Nadella's compensation is no longer linked to its performance. Again, this is the CEO of Microsoft, Satya Nadella, somehow getting his compensation, I imagine, only in part tied to Xbox Game Pass growth. Which, yeah, that might explain for the past 2 years that you have Larry Erb, Major Nelson running Xbox and not getting really as much support as it seems like Satya Nadella is willing to give to the guy who is now in charge. I forget his name. I want to say Steve Ballmer, but that's not right. Steve Ballmer, I think, was in Microsoft a long time ago. He may still be at Microsoft, but I don't think he's involved with the game part of Microsoft. Let's see, we already talked about Dreams, a Little Big Planet developer Media Molecule making layoffs. Roblox cutting jobs in China, but says it has a long-term vision for the market. And then Final Fantasy VII Rebirth keeping most of its predecessor's development team. Which yeah, that certainly makes sense that Final Fantasy VII's the first reboot of this reboot trilogy would keep most of its predecessors' team. We don't want a Star Wars Episode 7, 8, 9 situation where you have completely different people doing sequels to each other. It's frankly shouldn't even be a question that they would have to mention it, but I suppose it's good to hear. Then once again, the follow list cleanup just didn't work, so then that's going to turn on the auto blur and just bring us to all new games on Steam, which, yeah, I'm going to try and burn through these very quickly, and I think we can probably pull that off fairly quickly too, particularly if we start to see garbage games. I want to give this game a chance, but there really is no reason to give this game a chance. Yeah. Need to be a little bit more curating than that. I'll give this a chance. I don't know if my blur unblur is reacting as fast as I'd like it to. I'll give this a chance. This feels like a game that might be appealing to more girls, for lack of a better way of describing it. More domestic people, more people that aren't looking to shoot people in the face, which we have very few games like that anyways. Here we have our first adult game called Undress, which is 2D, colorful anime, slightly older characters. Some of the screens look like they are 3D models that have been flattened to be 2D. And it's a memory game, which, you know, looks like there might be 12 memory puzzles in it. It's $1.49, English, Chinese, Korean, Russian, Japanese. Yeah, it says it has 12 artworks and of 5 different girls in it. We had a very weird resurgence for the past, like, maybe it was 2 weeks ago, and then starting this Monday, we started to see this change in that we saw this large bundle of more 2D anime style adult games being allowed again. So this is a paint the object but also walk around game. Interesting idea. It's interesting to take like an RPG Maker software and then say, hey, actually I'm going to use that as an infrastructure to say this is how we're going to do a standard puzzle game of painting in the pictures, which I imagine this is the actual gameplay mechanic the whole time. Now, it might be a time of the year thing, certainly, as to why we're all of a sudden seeing more anime adult games. But, you know, I really didn't expect to see a resurgence. I thought that that was just going to be the new normal, that there would be this soft censorship in which games don't get released on Steam at all, or hard censorship in that case, or soft censorship in which adult games get buried all in one giant bundle on Friday. But it's been fairly inconsistent if they are doing a lot of bundling, other than maybe they've gone on a much larger scale and they've bundled what was a month's worth of anime looking adult games and and released them all over the course of a week. So potentially, if you're only allowed to sell your game 1 week out of every 4, there is something to that. This looks interesting, certainly. Full Japanese audio. Unfortunately, it doesn't support English. That in itself, though, still builds some hope in me. This almost certainly is a girl-on-girl Yuri visual novel, which they're tagging LGBTQ+, as far as a romance between 2 girls happening. Which certainly in that case too, it's worth pointing out that if you're pro LGBTQ+, then visual novels, romance stories between lesbians, between guys, the yaoi, those Japanese games, while they may be somewhat sensationalizing the experience, like most romances tend to do, or exoticizing the experience, which is a decent argument to make. They are also the only people talking about those experiences in any serious form or fashion, focusing on it. It's either you get a Yuri visual novel, or you get the token lesbian kiss in the middle of a 60-hour game at the very end that could be edited out and really doesn't in any way address relationships or romances or anything like that. I'm thinking of Horizon Forbidden West DLC. Yeah, the DLC for Horizon Forbidden West, not even the main game of Horizon Forbidden West. Or you run into the problem where instead of introducing a character like Abby in The Last of Us as being potentially a lesbian, you introduce her as the damsel in distress little girl, and then you drastically change the character in the second game and then throw out lesbian overtones that just don't feel natural, like the character was developed enough. Noticeably here, these Metal Gear games are not getting particularly well reviewed, and on Steam they're being sold individually anyways. But yeah, that is definitely a problem. They've also bundled this in a weird way, so there's only certain ways you can actually seemingly get some things, like Metal Gear and Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake, the original versions of the game, only available if you buy it in a bundle, it seems, with the remastered version. And it's kind of questionable why you would even bother to remaster and re-release Metal Gear Solid 3 when it must have just been really easy. But why even do that when you're making a remake and there's visually not that big of a difference between the remaster and the remake? Here we have a weird adult game called Exquisite Fishing, which it looks like it's a fishing casual minigame with the twist of catching anthropomorphic 2D pixely ladies, animals. I'm seeing a shark lady with blue hair and him engaging, the male fisher character engaging with them. The visuals here are too blurry and pixely to be particularly interesting. The game is English, it claims to have full audio, it's selling for $4.24. It really just comes off as you've taken an interesting idea of how would you take a fishing game and add some adult content to it, and then you've just answered that question very poorly by saying, well, you do the fishing minigame, and then there's a weird bestiality, for lack of a better term, scene that is not animated well. Yeah. There is almost certainly a better way to do that by just having like topless mermaids swim around while you're fishing, and just occasionally in the background seeing some nudity if you're trying to have an adult game like that. But weirdly, in this one screenshot, there is a mermaid, but she's not even topless. And again, she's pixely. So you'd want really high graphics, high levels of graphics. And that would be a tough to deliver on. Again, the first Metal Gear Solid Master Collection not being reviewed particularly high either. Moving on, Night Without Sword. Looks like it's possibly a block pushing game. Yeah, I don't think there's quite enough here for me to say yes to it. Then we're back to an adult game. We're seeing just a large amount of adult games in general. Again, 2D, colorful anime style characters. This one's called Succubus Girl. Looks to me like it might be in part a visual novel, in part a dating sim and simulator games. So it actually seems like there's a lot of visual polish to it and a lot of stuff going on. It kind of has some overtones like it might be like a mobile game where you would have to either wait to build up stamina or pay for in-app purchases, but it doesn't have in-app purchases. It's $10.19, so it's fairly high process. Simulation game full of exploration and puzzle elements. Developing relationships. There's a button here. You can chat with people, you can play games, you can change clothing, and you can feed the lady. There might be some groping simulator touching minigame in it also. 34 basic CGs, including more than 350 different differentials and 4 motion CGs. I'm gonna put this one on the follow list just to see how people like it. So far, it has 34 positive, mostly positive reviews, 97% positive reviews. So Succubus Girl really taking it to a much higher level in quality. Whereas the next game is just called Penis Hero, adult only, and it looks like it is a almost joke beat 'em up game. You're a guy with a large phallus using it as a weapon against some repetitive, kind of small pixely ladies, of which I think there might only be 3 or 4 different variants there. It's almost at 99 cents a good enough gimmick game to make sense, but yeah, it seems like it's probably not doing much of a payoff. This is one of those rare occasions where a cutscene almost certainly would be helpful, and I'm not seeing any screenshots that indicate any cutscenes where the graphics would be much better. The backgrounds look very repetitive and boring and dull. There is a lot of times where an adult game, if it tried to just be a little bit halfway from what it wants to be and halfway between a regular game, it might be better. I could see a beat 'em up game like River City Ransom that had some adult scenes in it, in the same way that Witcher 3 is a Skyrim style game, for lack of a better description, with some adult scenes in it. Like, Skyrim would have been, I mean, Witcher 3 would have been a lot worse had it been 100% focused on adult content. I think I'm going to say no to Dungeon Full Dive just because of its poor reception and the visuals not being that interesting. But the concept, potentially, of taking tabletop gaming and bringing it to a virtual world might make sense eventually. I'm going to end up making a lot of YouTube shorts around Metal Gear games. Really is just the only competition today outside of all the adult games is a bunch of Metal Gear games that are only relevant because of the fact that that the old games are relevant. I'm going to say yes to this game, The Guest, just because they're showing off this character. Usually I would say no to a horror game. I'm pretty much saying no to almost all horror games, but yeah. I'll say yes. I make a weird exception. Nothing to that game. Maze Maverick looks like it's a 3D Pac-Man clone. There's a lot of these back when Pac-Man was really popular and Pac-Man was about the only thing you could run on a 286 computer, pre-Pentium 1 computers. And even using the phrase Pentium these days doesn't mean anything, does it? Yeah. Yeah. I guess Intel still calls their CPUs Pentiums, but I don't think people really would recognize the phrase. I think we can say no to the edibles pretty easily. We can say no to this pretty easily. Wouldn't be surprised if there's still quite a lot. This is a weird enough looking game that I'll give it a chance. Area of the Crystal Kingdom. I'm gonna say yes to this just because I kind of like the graphics. Probably still have a ton of games to go through. One of my macros was programmed to stop after 50 when it shouldn't have been, and I think it may have been looking at new games. So it is very possible that up until this point, for basically the past year that I've had my macro going through all the new games, we've been missing some games. It certainly has been the case that I've said I've been missing games. There's not really a great reason why I would have stopped at 50 other than just making an assumption that I shouldn't have made, that something went wrong. It's better for something to go wrong and for me to end up looking at games I've already seen twice than it is for me to assume something's gone wrong and miss games. This Scene Investigators is an interesting idea for a game. Yeah. There have been some CSI licensed games where you play as crime scene investigators, but that's pretty much it. It really would have made more sense for there to be more games like that. There probably have been some visual novels where you play as a crime scene investigator. Next we have a western looking visual novel called Goblet of Mercy, which I'll give a chance to that. And then we have a shoot 'em up game called Pudding. Does this support English? No, it's Japanese only. I would have given this a go because while I generally tend not to advertise shoot 'em up games, it looks like they're focusing more on a character and possibly talking to you while you're doing the shoot 'em up part and collecting items as upgrades. Halloween Stories horror mode. I'll probably say no to this just because I won't get a YouTube short out fast enough for this. Big Fish Game putting out a $10 hidden object game. We'll give Dark Envoy here is already on the fall list, so I've already made a short on that. City Skyline 2 is already on the fall list. Pickleball Smash we'll give a chance to. Deadly Flare. I think we can say no to that. Rip Out is already on the fall list, so this might be where I may have gotten the idea that stopping at 50 was the right number. I'm going to say no to the Build Merriment. Cry Machina has come out on Steam. It's one of those games that had been advertised and had been coming out for nearly 6 months to a year, so I've already made a YouTube short on it, although arguably if I did make a YouTube short on it, I probably made it a long time ago. So far so good on Cry Machina. I'll give it a little bit more time. I definitely have a desire to play more of those AA style adult game, not adult games, Japanese games, but honestly never really get around to it. Deeper Chamber Resurrection. Now this is a weird one in that it is something I should consider because it was already on the fall list, but I'm actually going to have to make an executive decision here and say no. I'm just really tired of trying to play card-based dungeon crawler games, and fantasy-based visuals don't really catch my attention. Deck building really isn't something I'm super interested in, so just not enough here catching my attention. I really do need to start prioritizing a lot more as far as what games I should buy and should play. This Blockbuster looks like a game where you play as a Godzilla-like creature and destroy the city, which looks like it might be interesting. It is a VR game only though, so yeah, probably never going to play it. Here we have Core Defense, which is for a tower defense game, maybe a little bit polished or a little bit differently animated, but still it's a tower defense game, so it's going to be a no. Arise from the Shadows. Give that a chance. I'm obviously not putting a lot of thought into these decisions. Death of the Rising Sun. I'm going to say no to. Simply Moose. It's going to be a no. The Green Room Experiment Episode 2. Let's see if we can find Episode 1 and see how well that was received. Well, this game came out on January 27th and it has only 10 reviews. So I'm going to say no to Episode 2 because Episode 1 is just not really relevant enough. We have a psychological horror, which I'll put this on the fall list, but the visuals don't look good enough to get a short. Gene Wars, I think we can say no to. Yeah, we have another adult game called Affectionate Annie, which is 3D CGI characters. And these 3D CGI games, which really are, I think, made by maybe only one company, if not 2 or 3 companies. I wouldn't be surprised if it's actually one company that goes by 2 or 3 different brand names or publishing names. They tend to do the same asset flip, large, expensive looking houses. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if there's a small percentage of people who just appreciate the big open floor plan decorating and design of these houses as much as they appreciate the adult content. Because yeah, obviously you don't want to be cramped in a tiny tiny little closet in your swingers activities, but yeah. In all fairness, a lot of swingers do tend to seem to have a lot of extra cash and do tend to have very big houses with lots of room for lots of activities. What's funny is there's like either a loading bar or a life bar in one of these screenshots for Affectionate Annie, and the camera is weirdly zoomed out from her quite a bit. Seems like you really are just either following Annie as a character or playing as her. Seems like it's a simulator in which you can just move characters around. One of the sales points here is they're just dragging characters around and depicting, letting you animate it. I'm not sure that there's really a real game here, or no match 2 type things. It's English, it claims to have full audio in English. I wouldn't be surprised though if for most people there's barely 20 minutes of content in the game for $12.99. And that is one of the problems, is that the simulator games in particular are just simulators. They're not really games, so it's hard to make a choice. Next we have one called the Seaman Donation Truck. That's an adult game, which is 3D CGI succubus anime cat girls. They do have both cat ears and succubus wings. Seems like there's a mini game in which you have to play whack-a-mole, and if you win at whack-a-mole you get an adult scene, and that seems to be the entirety of the game. $8.99 English, Chinese, and Japanese. They're saying the game is approximately 15 minutes long for $8.99. That is way too expensive, and if anything it possibly highlights why even asset flipping 3D CGI elements is perhaps too expensive. But yeah, mostly I think it is probably not that expensive to asset flip 3D CGI characters, as much as it is just a case of people trying to maximize as much profit off of suckers as they can. Stone Guardian here doesn't look interesting. Inherently, an adult game trying to rip you off for 15 minutes of content for $10 puts some of the microtransaction laden mobile games in a better light. The bar is just being lowered by so much, but we really don't want to see the bar lowered. We want to see the quality go up. Yep. At least if a simulation game isn't actually a game because it doesn't have any interactivity or gameplay mechanics, at least a simulation game has the possibility of lasting longer than 15 minutes. This plant gallery as a concept, again, is probably just asset flipped plants in a simplistic art gallery building, but yeah, it's not really interesting me in any way. You need to find keys, open chest, and connect the right name tags to the right paintings. Yeah, barely a puzzle there. Yeah. This is one of those games, quote unquote, that feels like it's just somebody who barely knows how to program. Oh, by the way, speaking of somebody who barely knows how to program, the Yandere Simulator developer, who goes by the name Yandere Dev, was mentioned once again on Reddit. One of the infamous tweets I think he made or post somewhere, and honestly I'm not sure if he hasn't always been a troll and pretending like he doesn't know how to program, was him writing a incredibly stupid piece of JavaScript programming code to figure out if a number is even or odd. And the way he was writing it was basically if the number equals 1, then return that it is odd. If the number equals 2, then return the number is even, when there are way better mathematical ways to determine if something is even and odd. All you have to do is run modulus, which is the percentage sign in most programming languages. So if a number mod 2 equals 0, it's even. If a number mod 2 is not equal to 0, then that would mean it has a remainder after being divided by 2 of 1, then it's odd. So you could literally do what he wrote like 20 lines of code to do in one very obvious, easy to write code. And honestly, that may very well have been a meme more than anything. But then people started talking about Yandere Dev again, and apparently, from what I saw on Reddit, so take this with a huge grain of salt, they have once again managed to find controversial evidence, potentially, against Yandere Dev that he's been grooming underage people, or at least talking inappropriately with underage people, which is potentially, I think, actually led to actual criminal action. So we may have news later on that will find that Yandere Dev is actually in criminal hot water, which is as good of a reason and way to wrap up Yandere Simulator's development as anything else. I don't know if I stopped following him and unsubscribed to his YouTube channel, or if he just stopped posting things, but yeah. It's been years and years, and even the concept of making a Yandere Simulator game has lost any real appeal at this point, and so even if somebody else was going to make one, that wouldn't succeed, let alone his attempt has not gone anywhere. We may see a resurgence of the idea in a few years, though. Every day, every programmer, including myself, should strive to not be like Yandere Simulator, in that they wouldn't accept any help, and they rejected help even when forced to take it, and that they were a terrible programmer and an obnoxious person who also was unsure on his vision and was constantly changing his mind and just feature creeping his software. I mean, he really just hit the full gamut of how not to make a program of any sort, or how not to make a video game of any sort. And doing it so incredibly publicly, having every possible idea that comes to his head be put up for public discussion. It's really dumb. Back to video games, though. We have Japan Train Models, JR East Edition. Which, yeah, I think we can say no to that. Yeah, we have a game that says this game is crap, which we can simply say, okay, I'll believe you, and move on. Here we have what looks like a Tapper Bar clone game. Although it doesn't really feel like it is a Tapper game as much as it is a bar simulation management game. Which there really isn't too much difference between running a bar and delivering food. So why limit yourself to just running a bar? Yeah. I guess I'll be generous and give this a chance, but almost certainly it's not going to go anywhere. There might be some search engine optimization around having the title another bar game. Midnight Acres. Interesting. It looks like a half Stardew Valley asset flip game, and half you're going to be eaten by a monster dinosaur fighting game. Which at a certain level, that would be something different, is that if you had 3D hyper-realistic graphics and you were farming instead of Stardew Valley being very much 2D, top-down perspective, that might change it. Here we have a 2D, more comic book style Western visual novel in the adult section called Lover's Trophy for $1.99. Which there's still very much an inconsistency. I can show this one because there's just nothing in the screenshots. Yeah, a real inconsistency when you have an adult-only game that doesn't have any screenshots showing any adult-only content, and then you look at this animation style and you probably wouldn't be very interested in seeing this rough comic book style animated animation style in adult content. It's English only, it's $1.99, and almost certainly it just doesn't belong in the adults only section as in the form that the adult only section exists. Now at a certain level, maybe the adult only section should grow and include a lot more games and evolve as to what it is, but yeah, it's just not the reality we exist in. Battlegrid was already on the following list. Sinister Knights. Should I make a short on this? Probably. I don't know how many of the Five Nights at Freddy's games, though, really are worth mentioning. I'm gonna give this one a chance because this looks like it's a match 3 dungeon crawling game, or match 4 dungeon crawling game, which there was a game like that, 10 Million, and I Must Build the Boats was the sequel that had that general idea. But then you also have the exact same game called It's Harvest Time from the exact same person, and if I hadn't seen this game, I would have said okay to It's Dungeon Time, but having seen that they put out 2 games that are almost exactly the same in a row, I'm going to now remove this one from consideration. Next we have an adult game called Hot Redheads, which is older, taller, kind of colorful, kind of realistic, a little bit in the middle, 2D ladies. It seems for the most part they are just in more individual boudoir photo styles. I should describe that. They say it's a puzzle game, although they're not really showing any of the puzzle gaming elements. It's $1.59, it's English only. Let's see if we can get an idea of how many pictures are there. No telling, so I'd have to assume it's somewhere around 5. Seems like it might just be the same girl over and over again. Yeah, there is a certain level as far as I probably should describe the screenshots as being, is this a engagement screenshot where people are engaging in an activity, or is this a individual screenshot? This next game is also an adult game called Naga Girls, and weirdly this is almost certainly what the fishing game should have been. It's a bunch of mermaid ladies swimming around underwater, although most of them are covered up in the screenshots, so weirdly not getting a lot of nudity here. There's like one of a mermaid lady, although she's not really even a mermaid, showing off her butt, but she's not a mermaid because she has legs, where the others all have a mermaid tail. They say this is just a classic memory game, and they're selling it for $1.59. English only again. And again, just not any indication as far as how many pictures there are. Also mentioning for this game and the previous game that if you just press H on the keyboard, you complete the level, so you can just cheat. Honestly, I would expect there to actually be more puzzle games, cheap, simple puzzle games like this in the adult section, just coming out all the time. If anything, a lot of the adult games are just too ambitious when they don't ever get anywhere close to their ambition. I think we can say no to this game. The visuals are just off. Monster Hide. I think I'll say no to that. I have another Halloween puzzle game here, which, yeah, it's just too late to do anything with that. Here we have a solitaire game, which we can make a short around that. Are we close to the end? Not really. Beast is already on the fall list. This game I think we can say no to. Backrooms Constructions, I think I'll say no to. I'm pretty much gonna say no to anything that has backrooms in names. Screams from the Past, I'll say no to. Here we have what looks like a Chinese only or Japanese only adult visual novel. Not a single bit of it is translated, so it's really hard to tell what it is. It's $11.69. It's Japanese only. Like, there's a problem here, though. There's a real problem in this, and I think what I probably need to do, see if I can translate the page. Yeah, so I'll use my translator here. So, according to the translations, this game is called Women Communication, probably the world's first high-speed dirty talk adventure, action-adventure game where you find dirty words that have been accidentally created during conversations. Which just feels like this is something that uniquely could only really work in the Japanese language, whereas the English language is less likely to have a lewd or dirty word in the middle of a conversation, and so it's like you're shooting the words down. So I'd assume that this word here, or this symbols here, is a dirty word. But none of these screenshots really justify this being in the adult section at all. And $11.69 may be a little too expensive, but it says there's only lewd words being displayed. There's just like no nudity in this game at all. So why does this justify being tagged while not technically in the adult section, still being censored by a secondary tag? Which inherently Valve needs to address that there's literally two tiers of adult content that by default are being censored to 99.999% of all people on Steam. I'm going to put this on the follow list. Unfortunately, it probably won't be translated to English. If it was translated to English, it would be rough, because this is where you'd really have to localize things. It might work translated to something like German, there are definitely other languages where dirty words could be in the middle of a conversation, but honestly, you would have to make the characters have Tourette syndrome or something, where they're just saying dirty words in the middle of conversations instead of it being a dirty word is the same vowels and syllables. In contrast, here you have a game like Aquarium, which definitely has that colorful moe or kawaii animation style. I'd say it's probably a little bit more kawaii. It kind of does lean more even into moe. And yet, this one, as a dating sim, selling for $20.40, doesn't have any nudity in it, and yet I would say it has more visual than the last one. Yeah, I really don't think I'm that off base as far as just the general idea of there being real inconsistencies as far as Valve's self-reporting mechanisms go. I don't think it's even accomplishing what Valve wants it to accomplish, let alone it accomplishing anything that feels like sanity. Now, at a certain level, these kinds of censorship rules and regulations are insane in general. You see it with just like rated R movies, where there's definitely movies rated R that should be NC-17, and then there's PG-13 movies that should be rated R, and then there's rated R movies that should be PG-13. But I would say for the most part the motion picture, the MPAA group does a fairly decent job in rating movies. I don't think there's anything particularly interesting here with Replay Boys, but I'll give it a chance anyways. Citizens on Mars, I'll give a chance to. MGCM Combat Edition, interesting. See, basically a character here that's almost topless, and this is some kind of fighting game. It's free to play, and it's English and Japanese. Yet once again you have a case of a game here that probably needs a bit of a warning, I would say. This MGCM title, though, I've never heard of this either. Stray Souls, I know we've already seen. It's been on the fall list. I think we probably should be at a point where I'm going to start seeing games. I guess inherently the concern was that with the 50 game limit, which, yeah, I probably went through 60 or 70 games this time today. I guess the idea would be, if a game was being used as my flag, my marker, to say I've already looked at this game, and then that game was removed from Steam, then I wouldn't see it the next time I look at the list. But I think that's a minor concern, really, compared to the problem I've been having of missing games otherwise. We have another game here called Cafe Maid Hentai Edition. And what's weird about this is it looks very much like it's a mobile game that's been ported. But honestly, the adult mobile games are actually usually a lot higher quality. So you have what I would call CGI characters, but still colorful like anime characters, and a little bit low polygon. So it creates this whole kind of mobile 3D visual style, for lack of a better description. But every single screenshot here is just crammed with stuff, bespoke, custom-made stuff for this specific game, and it just doesn't feel like there's a single bit of asset flipping in Cafe made. I imagine there's probably a censored version of this. It's early access for $15.99, and it doesn't have any in-app purchases, which makes it kind of questionable as far as why does it look so much like a mobile game if that's not how it's really going to play. Although, in all fairness, that's exactly what I would like to see, is more mobile games remove the microtransactions and just sell it as a final, nicely polished product, for a full price. That being said, there's no guarantee that that's really what's going to happen. It may very well be a case that we see mobile game developers take out the microtransactions but really make no other changes, so it still takes, it's either impossible or very difficult to play the game because there's just a massive amount of stamina meters, or like expensive grindy sections, or grindy sections in general. Well, we are almost done, so we've been going 3 hours and 15 minutes. That's not super long either, so there probably will be some scenarios though where at certain points during the year a ton of games do get released and it is an extra hour stream. I wouldn't be surprised if it is an extra 15 minutes on average for every stream and some of these games look interesting, but I have run out of things to really say, so I'm really definitely putting more effort, I'll give this one a chance to, into describing the ones that have to be censored, so that does take more time and that does take more breath, as it were, just to breathe and say the words to describe something. Alright, well, that's going to be it for this stream. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and watch every second of my videos. If you want to support me further, there's a link down below in the description box. Thank you for watching. Have a good evening.